When discussing classic 3D platformers, the same few names always seem to come up. Super Mario 64, Spyro the Dragon, Banjo-Kazooie. These games are all very highly regarded nowadays, and for good reason. I mean, Super Mario 64 practically defined the genre and was a revolutionary step forward in gaming history. But unfortunately, not all games are as fondly looked back upon as this, and one such example is Donkey Kong 64. The weird part is that it was really well received upon release, being seen as one of the Nintendo 64's greatest titles, yet another smash hit from Rareware. So, what happened? Well, as time's gone on, the cracks and imperfections have started to show. It's no secret that DK64 hasn't really been able to stand the test of time as well as other games, and because of this, it doesn't really have the best reputation nowadays. However, while its flaws are hard to ignore, I still believe that the game did a lot right, and this tends to get undermined by all the criticism, buried beneath all the issues that have started to surface. I think it's kind of a shame that most of the high points of DK64 are rarely ever talked about today, so hey, why not take a trip down memory lane? I'm FibreOpticBroadbean and this is the forgotten beauty of Donkey Kong 64. We may as well start with the bad, because there's a bit to unpack here. One of the biggest problems with this game is that it feels really bloated and can be a bit of a drag at times. Worlds can sometimes feel unnecessarily big and empty, and this is most apparent in Gloomy Galleon, which just isn't very fun to travel around with all of the water. This issue is worsened by the fact that most of the game's collectibles are exclusive to and can only be obtained by a specific Kong, which leads to a heavy amount of backtracking. You're only able to switch Kongs in designated tag barrels which are scattered throughout each level, making picking up all of the collectibles in an area with items for multiple different Kongs a pain. You'll constantly be retracing your steps to go back to a tag barrel and then to collect stuff in an area you've already likely been to multiple times. This sluggishness and the scattered nature of the game's collectibles are the key issues at heart here, but there are a couple of smaller things to address. Further adding to the game's slow pace are these minigame barrels which break up the flow of the platforming. Most of these I'm completely fine with because they're a nice change of pace, but they feel a bit too frequent and some of them, and I won't mention any names, are very annoying. It's also mandatory to beat the original Donkey Kong arcade game, not once, but twice. And this is painful. I'd understand having to beat it once in order to get a golden banana or something, but having it as a requirement to do it twice in order to beat the game? That's just too far. At times, the game's controls can also be pretty janky, especially when flying with the jetpack as Diddy Kong. Once you've used it enough, it becomes more tolerable, but it just doesn't work that well. There's a lot more you can say about this game's flaws, but I won't delve into too much detail here. When talking about DK64 these days, most people tend to focus on what it did wrong, but in doing so, it's incredibly easy to forget what made the game special in the first place. I mean, we can start with the obvious, that being the sheer size of the game. There is an unbelievable amount to do here, and while this is a bit overwhelming at first, it is seriously impressive. With such vast, expansive environments to travel around, packed to the brim with items and secrets to discover, the game keeps you occupied for a while. It also had 5 playable characters. The whole DK crew is here, and they are great. Each Kong has their own playstyle, and despite all feeling very different from one another, they're all fun to use. They all have their own unique weapons, instruments, and special abilities which are acquired over the course of the game, courtesy of Fungi, Candy, and Cranky Kong respectively. This helps to diversify the cast even further, with some particularly notable skills being Lanky Kong's handstand, which helps to get up steep slopes, as well as Tiny Kong's hair twirl, which is very useful for making long jumps or correcting your path in midair. Each Kong brings something different to the table, and I love it. From taking out enemies from afar with DK's coconut gun, to cartwheeling around as Diddy Kong, to just barging through hordes of enemies without a care in the world as Chunky Kong, the game absolutely nailed its playable characters. That doesn't just go for gameplay either, because each member of the crew has their own completely unique personality, and this is so charming. You've got Lanky, who's all goofy, Tiny, who has quite the attitude, and of course Chunky Kong, who's a total scaredy cat. Who'd have thought? Each Kong's personality really shines through in their different animations. They all have their own set of idle animations, tag barrel animations, celebrations, the list goes on. Some specific examples that come to mind are Lanky Kong juggling orange grenades, and Chunky straight up pointing towards Tiny and even saying her name in the tag barrel because he desperately doesn't want to get picked. Tiny. It's the little touches like this that help you to fall in love with these guys, coupled with the fact that they're all a blast to play as. Even if a game's characters are cool, that only matters if the levels are fun to explore as well. So how do the worlds in DK64 hold up? Well, all things considered, not too badly honestly. With a couple of exceptions, they're actually pretty fun to explore and just wander around in. What I like most about these places though is that they each had their own set pieces which were really memorable. Fungi Forest had this giant mushroom and even its own day and night mechanic. This would change the world around you, allowing you to access certain areas you couldn't before, including this cool spider mini-boss which was exclusive to nighttime. Frantic Factory had this huge machine that you had to scale up on the production floor, introducing a ton of obstacles and dangerous jumps. Crystal Caves had this giant kosher guy who'd intermittently cause stalactites to rain down on the Kongs in certain regions of the level. To explore this world in peace, you'd need to take him out as soon as possible, and it's incredible how the world would instantly transform from an ever-looming threat to something almost serene and peaceful. Speaking of which, at this point I feel like I'd be remiss not to mention the game's music. Just like with Banjo-Kazooie, Grant Kirkhope was at the helm here, and as always, his work was unparalleled. The tracks in this game range from upbeat and cheery to melancholic and sad depending on the situation, and I feel like that brings me on to something else that this game handles perfectly. Atmosphere. The soundtrack goes hand in hand with the visuals to superbly convey the mood of the game's many different settings. Surprisingly, a lot of the locations in this game are pretty gloomy and dark. Seriously, there are a lot of caves here, but DK64 portrays these areas just right. The music has a slower and emptier feel in locations such as these, and this is complemented by typically dimmer lighting and murkier colours. The happier music is also awesome, with the DK Isle theme being one of my favourite tracks in all of gaming. As for DK Isle itself, it does a very nice job as a hub world. Alongside the music, the place itself is a lot of fun to navigate, with secrets everywhere to find. There are a ton of golden bananas littered around the collection of islands, hidden in alcoves, across lava pits, and even in giant boulders. Donkey Kong's island is the main attraction here, but you're also free to explore K. Rool's ship, the Banana Ferry Island, and you can also pay a visit to DK's treehouse and what's left of the banana horde in typical DK fashion. I used to love just walking around here as a kid, but if there's one issue with it, I'd say that, much like the rest of the game, it's a little bit too big. It can feel a tad on the slow side to get around, and there's quite a bit of empty space, although this problem is lessened by the addition of 5 warp pads, which take you to key locations on the islands. One such location is K. Lumsey's cage, where this poor dude, who just so happens to be K. Rool's younger brother, has been locked up for not cooperating with his plans. Due to this, he quickly becomes an ally of the Kong family, helping them to access new worlds in exchange for setting him free. The cage he's trapped in has 8 different locks, which are guarded by different bosses at the end of each level, and personally, I love the boss fights. While a couple of them were reused, they all provided a really cool challenge and were at a good level of difficulty. This is something that similar platformers at the time struggled with, as I felt that bosses in other games from the same era are often just too easy or unmemorable. Here in DK64 though, there are quite a few fights that really stuck in my mind. Despite being fairly early on in the game, the fight with Mad Jack is one of the hardest ones, but it's such a cool concept and uses the abilities of Tiny Kong to great effect. The fight has a pretty creepy vibe to it. I mean, you're fighting this crazy looking evil Jack-in-the-Box thing with some eerie laughing sound effects in the background as well. I also had a great time with the rematch against Armadillo and Crystal Caves. Compared to the first time you take him on, there are a lot of new elements added to this fight. The guy gains a whole array of sweet moves, like creating shockwaves and launching this giant homing missile. Then there's King Cutout, and I mean, a cardboard cutout of K. Rool? That's brilliant! It's such a creative idea and makes for a very unique battle. However, I think the best of them all is the final showdown with King K. Rool. The reason being that, unlike the other fights, it uses the combined strengths and individual abilities of all 5 Kongs one after another. In each phase of the fight, a different Kong is used, starting with the leader of the bunch. In DK's phase, you have to shoot yourself into K. Rool using a barrel cannon. In Diddy Kong's, you have to fly real high with your jetpack on and shoot down the lights. Then Lanky has to stretch his arms out and play the trombone to lure him into banana peels. Tiny has to shrink in size and sneak into his shoes to shoot his toes, and finally, Chunky Kong has to grow massive and land the final blow. This is a great demonstration of the Kongs working together to achieve an end goal, and another instance of this is Hideout Helm. This is the final area before the K. Rool fight, in which you have to use all of the Kongs to deactivate the Blastomatic, a giant laser aimed at DK Isle. This level is absolutely fantastic, and there's a real sense of urgency here. From the ticking time limit to the ridiculously intense background music, it really gets your blood pumping. The pressure is on, the stakes are high, and it feels like you need to take action to save the DK crew from their impending doom. You know, I feel really conflicted about Donkey Kong 64. On the one hand, the game is scattered, bloated, and flawed in its execution, but on the other, it has a surprising amount going for it. The sheer personality of the characters, for example, speaks volumes, and the way the game handles atmosphere combined with the incredible sound design is great. Even with how flawed the game is, I still can't help but love it for all the redeeming qualities it has. Sure, I can definitely understand how newer players who didn't play the game as a kid would struggle to get into DK64, but I just can't bring myself to dislike it. Equally, with that said, it's still important to look at the games you love through a critical lens so you can understand how the mistakes they made can be fixed going forward. I just hope that one day, the Donkey Kong franchise gets that second chance at a 3D game so it can actually rectify the errors made by DK64. In any case, setting its flaws aside, I genuinely feel as if the game had a lot of potential. Beneath all the sluggishness, beneath all the backtracking, the makings of a good game were definitely there. While there are certainly other platformers out there I prefer like the Banjo games, there's just something about this game that's strangely magical and I can't quite place what it is. Whenever I pick it up, I can't help but feel completely immersed in its world, so much so that I've beaten it 101%, getting every single collectible. But you wanna know the craziest part? I wouldn't be opposed to doing it again.